We appreciate all their support and effort that they put into our regional events. With that, we're going to kick off our afternoon conference. I reached out and I invited Kristen Carter as a featured speaker. A lot of us in this room are concerned with Chapter 78 regulations, and a big part of those are area of review searches. So Kristen's done a lot of assistance for range over the years in searching older historic oil and gas data and geologic data. We really appreciate that help. So I thought that she'd be a really good speaker to have come out this afternoon. So with that, I'll run through Kristen's bio. Kristen currently serves as the Assistant State Geologist of the Pennsylvania Geological Survey and manages its Economic Geology Division, which is comprised of the Petroleum and Subsurface Geology section, located in Pittsburgh, and the Mineral Resource Analysis section, which is located in Middletown. Kristen has worked as a petroleum geologist for the survey since 2001, and her current research efforts include unconventional petroleum reservoir studies, characterization of depleting and depleted natural gas fields for natural gas liquid storage, and carbon capture utilization and storage opportunities within the Appalachian Basin and the Mid-Atlantic U.S. offshore. Prior to joining the state, Kristen worked as a consulting hydrogeologist in the private sector, performing groundwater contamination assessments, abandoned mine and watershed reclamation projects, and bottled spring water source studies throughout the Appalachian region and beyond. So maybe some of your clients we served today, right?
Yeah.
Kristen holds a Master of Science degree in Geologic Sciences from Lehigh and a Bachelor of Science degree in Geology and Environmental Science from Allegheny College. She serves as an advisor to the Board of Directors for the Friends of Drake Well Incorporated, has been a member of the AAPG since 2007. Kristen currently serves as Vice President of the AAPG's Division of Environmental Geosciences and is acknowledged as a Certified Petroleum Geologist by the AAPG's Division of Professional Affairs. And I just want to say, she is a resource. If you need to know something, give her a call. She's very helpful, and she'll help you out as she does us a lot. So with that, I introduce Kristen. Please welcome her.
Thank you, everyone, and I'm going to take a brief tour today of some of the resources in terms of data that the survey can offer you as you're doing your various GIS and related things. So specifically, I'm going to focus on three things. I'll be talking about the survey's data and data products and our inventories with respect to the vintage and applicability of these various sources, and then I'll run through an example of using some of our survey data to do an AOR study. But before I talk about the kind of data resources we have, I want to explain to you why we actually go out and collect the information that we do. This is the missions statement of the survey, and it's important, I want everybody to understand that it is our role, or it's our job to make sure we provide you with factual data related to the state's geologic resources, and we want to use this information to contribute to the wise use and conservation of our lands and geologic included resources. So the three types of data products I'm going to talk about today are listed here. I'll start with EDWIN, which is our Exploration and Development Well Information Network. That's our state's archive of oil and gas well records and interpreted data. Then I'll talk about PA Geode, which is another online tool accessible through the state's the survey's website that allows you to get at different types of reports and other data. And then we'll broach the subject of farmline maps as well. So talking about EDWIN first, we named the system after Colonel Drake, who was the chap that drilled the world's first oil well up in Titusville in August of 1859. And this system was launched in the fall of last year as a replacement for the PARS WIS system, which you may have heard of. It was, at the time, it was about 22 years old and in much need of upgrades or replacement in terms of not just the type of data being gathered, but how that information was being consumed and served out to our subscribers and our external users. So the system now is a single comprehensive database of both documents, scanned, queryable well documents and paperwork, and also the data that comes off of those reports, and the data that, or the information that we interpret from those reports, we archive for the good of the order. And currently, we're at 180,000 wells, give or take, and counting. And the system is serving the information in the cloud now. So we are no longer relying on physical infrastructure, server infrastructure, or FTP sites per se to do our business. So to tell you a little bit more, give you a better flavor of what's in Edwin, I wanted to go over the 3 different vintages of permits and how things are numbered. So if you're using our system, you can navigate and make the most of it. Prior to the mid-20th century, there were no state regulations, as you probably are aware, for oil and gas well completions. So from the time Drake drilled his well through 1955, we consider that time frame the historic or legacy time frame. And to the extent that the survey has historical or old or legacy, whatever you want to call it, well cards or completion information from various sources, and we have been able to successfully locate those wells, we will consume them in our system as a 90,000 series well. So the green permit number there, that's the convention for these legacy wells that have not formally been ever permitted by DEP, but that we've got good location data on. And the graphic inset there is an example. It's the McGugan well, which was the first 90,000 series well logged for Washington County. And you can see that these are older, like 5x7 cards that are either typed or handwritten. And in many cases, these historical records would have come to the survey from our colleagues at the U.S. Geological Survey. So if we look at the mid-20th century, between 1955 and 61, these were the first real regulations of oil and gas well drilling and completion work. In 55, the coordination law, the Coal Mining Coordination Act, that required certain things to happen if you were drilling a well in an area where there was coal mining. And in 61, if you were drilling a well that was deep enough that was going to penetrate even the topmost inch or just a little bit of Onondaga limestone, it was going to be called a conservation well. So there were regulations put into place for that. Those vintage permits are going to start with the 20,000 series. So here's an example of one of the first permitted wells in Washington County. On the right, you see it's an early well reporting form with typed information, some of it handwritten. On the right, on the left, excuse me, we actually found an older well card that goes with it. So when you're in this 1950 to 1970 time frame, a lot of times we found the older well cards and then what was reported to the state at the time. And all of those would be associated with the official permit number. Moving forward in time to 1984, the Oil and Gas Act from that year required the state to permit oil and gas wells. And as a result of that, the state, the Commonwealth, agreed to register older wells that may have been drilled, well, certainly before 1984, but that didn't come under the requirements of reporting that the coal coordination type wells or the conservation type wells were requiring. So shallow oil, shallow gas wells, excuse me. If you wanted to keep operating those wells, you had to register them with the state. So for registration wells, a lot of times from the 1985 to 1990 time frame, the state would receive these registration forms with multiple permits. You could register, as many as you could fit on the form for a flat fee. And registration wells are going to start with a 0, the 5-digit permit number. If it starts with a 0, you know that's a registration well, an older well that has been brought into the modern regulatory scheme of things. And now most recently, the Pennsylvania Act 13 of 2012, that is the redo or the replacement of that older legislation from 1984. So now the state is required to deal with not just our routine or quote-unquote conventional oil and gas wells, but also shale gas drilling with the directional drilling and just the modern technologies that we know are happening in our backyard. So in this time and place, we now can and do consume the full API number. So you'll have the state code, the county code, the 5-digit permit number, and then those trailing zeros or ones that have to do with activity in the borehole over time. All the documents that come into us from DEP will have these full API numbers on, and we consume them. So on the right, you've got an example of a modern location plat. On the left, a modern well record. And if you think back to the well card or the early completion report screenshot I showed you on that last set of slides, you see that more and more information is required as we move through time. So there's more information to gather and to database for you. Okay, so I mentioned Edwin being a single application in the cloud where you could access these documents or get your digital data. I wanted to briefly talk about the types of documents and how you would get to them, and then we'll talk about the digital information as well. So we get these paper documents and to some extent e-permits, location plats and whatnot from DEP on a daily basis. So our Pittsburgh office works with the various regional offices of DEP's Bureau of Oil and Gas Management to consume this information. And you can think of us as the librarian of sorts for this stuff. It comes to us, we scan, upload, index that information so that you can then search it. And then if you find a document that you need or like, you can print it, download it, manipulate it further on your own. This is a bullet list of the 9 different document types that we have. It's pretty self-explanatory, although I will point out that the historical record at the bottom of the list, those are these older well cards that I was talking about before that we would have gotten from USGS or that would have been voluntarily reported by operators back in the day, for which we have not yet been able to locate or find good location data. So we haven't assigned a permit number to them, one of those 90,000 series numbers. So they're in the system, they can still be searched by county, municipality, farm name, etc., but they just don't have a quote-unquote permit number with them. And when my CIO asked me, well, how much information is going in there to the cloud, Chris, if I am conservative in my estimates, we're talking upwards of a couple million pieces of paper, essentially, and it's probably a lot more than that. Not all records, records of different vintage are going to have, less or more paperwork with them. Now, the other half of the system is all that digital data, so the things that we garner from the paperwork, OCR, or do data entry on, or interpret, in the case of geologists, all that information gets added to the fields for the different document types. And users of the older system, the PARS system, if you're familiar with that, the WIS reports you would run in Oracle, that process is now replaced by filters. So we use filters to query for our data. And with the screenshot, you can see all the different types of filters that are currently available. And for each one, there's different entries that you can make. So you can look for something very specific or very general depending on your needs. And then obviously download and use that information as you need to. So again, to give an estimate of how much data is in Edwin today, obviously it's going to change every day, but we would estimate at least 5 million or more pieces of data. And that's in due large part not just to the system now being able to consume more fields of information, but the fact that the state DEP is requiring so much more information on their forms. So on the location plat itself, there's at least 3 dozen fields that we've got to populate for new plats as we get them. Completion reports, 4 dozen. So it's a lot of information. Okay. The second thing I wanted to talk about was our PA Geode online mapping application. So this is available through our survey's homepage. There's also a link on your screen there too to take you to PA Geode. And it lets you search the state for any and all survey reports, maps, digital data that we've created for the geographic area that you constrain by your search. You can download the results of your search as a list or find the hyperlinks very quickly to find that map or find that digital data or find that county report. So if I do a search up here, it'll let you pick, you know you're looking for a mineral resource report, let's say, or a county report. You can search by report type, and then you'll come up with a short list or a hit list down at the bottom of your screen. There I am. And then you can save that hit list to your desktop, or just, you know, one by one hit the hyperlinks and find the reports that you want from that query. The third type of data resource I wanted to talk about today is our farmline map inventory. So those of you in the room who have worked with farmline maps know the goods and bads, the ups and downs of working with them. The survey does have an unpublished inventory of several hundred maps that we did not create, we have not checked or vetted in any way, and honestly we would not recommend as a standalone resource for locating legacy wells, but they can be a useful tool in some instances. And there, I mentioned hundreds of maps. There's various bases, so when you go to look at these, you'll see some are as old as maybe 1911, others are more maybe mid-20th century. And they tend to have, you know, the hand annotations of the landmen, the land people that were using them out in the field to do their scouting or to do their drilling activity tracking. So, an example of what you would find with our farmline maps and the usefulness of them. So a screenshot from 2 maps, the exact same area within the Carnegie 15-minute quad. We've outlined a few farm boundaries or property boundaries with red, and you know, if you look at the base, except for the coloration of them, they look like they're pretty much the same base. This is a 1911 topo map base. But what's different on each image is the number of wells, the location of wells maybe, or even the type of well or information that was hand inked in there. So which one's right and which one's wrong, or is, you know, do you even look at it like that? You know, that's the kind of discrepancies that we have seen in the inventory, that at least we have at the survey. We are making these available, so you in the audience, you're hearing this, you're the first to hear this. The FTP site at the bottom of my screen here, that is an FTP site that we've set up for the download of all of our farmline maps. Now historically, if any of you have worked with the survey, you know you've had to come to Pittsburgh and inspect them, couldn't make copies, etc. Because of the changing regulatory approach by our sister agency, we knew that we needed to make this process more reasonable for everyone. So with the proper disclaimer, these things are being made available to you, and you can download from that FTP site. When you do that, you'll have a zip file that you unzip, and you'll have 4 parts to it. There'll be a quick README in there to tell you what we've got. A couple different ways at which you could search or find a specific map if that's your intent. There's an Excel version and an Access database version. Those are all, you know, more or less for one-by-one type queries. There's a folder in there with all 249 farmline maps. So those are the holdings that the survey has in terms of anything that could be characterized as a farmline map. We made sure that we don't have any truly unique or truly redundant map images, you know, so they're all each a little different. And they're provided to you in a PDF format. We've we've accumulated these over the years informally as donations have come in, but again, we don't consider these our own. All right, so back to a little bit about data vintage and applicability. The Edwin system as well as PA Geode are going to give you information that covers the whole state. Okay, so you know if you're doing a statewide query, you're getting everything that we have. With respect to the PA Geode, it's going to start with the 4th series. The survey that I work for is the 4th survey. There was a 3rd and a 2nd and a 1st before us, so there are other vintages of reports. The farm line maps are more limited in extent. We have them for parts and pieces of Western PA, but it's not a uniform blanket coverage for the whole western half of the state. And the time frame I would constrain to, the early 20th century. So let me round out my talk by talking about AOR studies. So if I were to do this myself, this would be the kind of approach I would take. I would start with our PA Geode to get any background reading or legacy understanding for a certain area. Maybe it's the groundwater resources or the drilling activity or the mining activity. Get that from PA Geode. Then go to Edwin and use the filters that I alluded to do queries and find specific locations in the area that you're concerned about. And then maybe use those farmline maps on the back end of the process to corroborate any areas where you definitely have a data gap that there's no other credible source, but you're trying to explain something you might observe in a field with something on paper. Okay, so if I were to do this, let's say I've got a site in Washington County, West Bethlehem Township. I can go to PA Geode and select or query for information by location, and so I picked my county, and then I got a hit list. So I'd go through that hit list and pull off the website what's important to me for relative to the well pad that I'm citing. Then, logging into Edwin, I go to, there's a short list of queries that I'm going to mention to you that are probably most useful for an AOR study or a well pad citing desktop work that you might have to do. Looking for location plats by county municipality. So when I do that for my search area, I've got a couple hundred or so that come back. These digital data you could download, and the lat longs or a NAD83 geographic coordinate system, you could consume them in whatever software you use for your mapping or lease activity. If you already do that on a regular basis with Edwin, a lot of our companies do that. They mine the system daily for the latest and greatest stuff. And you realize, oh, well, we never did get the 90,000 series wells that Chris says that the survey has in there. So there's a query for that too. And if I do this same geographic area, I've got, what is that, 39? Something like that, 29. So a short list that I can then download and map or work with. And finally, if you're looking at a geographic area where you have, you've got some subsurface concerns, or the geologist or the engineer are coming to you asking for, what other activity? Are there deep wells here that we already know about? I need to plan this frac, so, how far down is the Marcellus? How much of a frac can we do? We don't want to, have any hydraulic communication with other wells in the vicinity. This is an example of, give me completions based on the formation at the TV of the wells, for, in this case, it's just Washington County altogether. And I've queried by greater than or equal to a stratigraphic code. These stratigraphic codes are, for the geologists in the room, they're the numeric equivalent of your rock name. So the deeper your formation, the bigger that number is, and the L group is 42,030 or whatever that number is. So if I'm looking for elk and deeper wells, that's my hit list. So, summary of the queries that I'm recommending for an area review study. A couple different well pad location type queries, and then if you've got some engineering or subsurface considerations, you'd go that way and look at the completions aspect. I would also encourage those of you who are Edwin subscribers and can get to the system remotely. You could also visit the survey offices in Pittsburgh or Middletown to get access. You don't need to subscribe. But when you navigate the system, there's so many different queries or filters that you can run. And these ones I'm talking about today are just an example of a focus query. So we have plenty more. And then finally, the farmline map inventory. So once you've downloaded that information from our FTP, if you'd like to run the Access database and you launch it, you'll see that you can search by county, 15-minute or 7.5-minute quad. So in my example search area, West Bethlehem Township, I realized, okay, my well pad was going to be in the Ellsworth quad. So I can do a search by that 7.5-minute name. You just type it in there and it's going to give you a short list. So some subset of that 249 maps of record. Alternatively, you can get to the same information by browsing the spreadsheet that comes with the download. And those things together, so the PA Geode for the general overall subsurface geology and environmental conditions or considerations, followed up with an Edwin query for specific well locations, wells of record, whether they're the legacy or the modern day stuff. And then if you've got to fill in some holes or corroborate other farmline maps that maybe you have in-house, you can always use our inventory to help you with that. And that's all I have. So I am done. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes of questions.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Who has
fire
questions?
away.
I have a whole bunch of questions. And probably
Get
Al
me
does
later.
too, because
Al and I work on
Yeah.
this a lot.
Yeah.
But one of the first questions I'd ask Chris, now what, obviously, and you can only focus on what the Geologic Survey has, but what, are there also companion databases or sources that we should be looking at DEP, or you're going to tell me, don't even look at their stuff, it's not worth it. I hope that's what you're going to tell me.
So the state survey is, we're part of DCNR, which is a sister agency to DEP. We have, some of our needs overlap, some of them don't. Our business needs are completely different than, I think, DEP's business needs. So when you go to the oil and gas management portion of DEP's website, you're going to find information that by and large they have deemed integral to their work. So the EFAX system, for example, that's, it's compliance tracking. It has nothing to do with, has this well actually been drilled and is it producing and how deep was it, by the way. SPUD reports and the like, those are all, whether a well is an active permit, again, it may not have been completed. So if you need to have like an overall view of soup to nuts, what's happening in a geographic area or what's happening with an individual permit number, I would recommend our site. Now, the only thing currently that is not backed up or archived, so to speak, in Edwin are the well-specific production data. PA Irish users may remember we did, until 2009, we did have all of the annual production reporting for oil and gas wells in WIS. But with the changing, with the legislation that required them to launch their own site and manage it differently, again, they have a different business process and way of looking at things. That reporting, was never brought back around to us in a formal way. But we are working on adding that functionality to Edwin, so it will happen. We're working on that now. So my hope is that even for production data by the end of this year, you could go to our system and get everything from all the paper trail on a well to the status of, is this really completed? Can I tell it's been fracked and therefore active? And, what might it be producing too? So it's just a difference in I think, the business model of our two agencies, and the philosophy are the two agencies that make it different.
Any other questions for Kristen?
We may have talked about this before. I have a method of getting new permits, finding out which new wells come online.
Yes.
Using IHS, okay? And then I take that list of new wells and I go to Edwin and look up plats for those wells. Many times, many of those plats won't be at Edwin. So, you know, the well has been permitted and IHS will have a list of that well, but I think platted Edwin. When that happens, who would you recommend I call to say, where is this plat? Should I call the DEP or should I call you guys? Because it seems, I get bounced back and forth between the two. Is there any recommendation that you would have on that? And secondly, if you have time, how does IHS get that information to begin with? What's that process?
Right, okay, thank you, Al. So the first issue about IHS serving the information, but we don't, maybe Edwin doesn't have the corroborating paperwork yet. IHS is mining not just Edwin, but EFACs on a daily basis, and their ogre production reporting stuff. So they're mining information from both agencies simultaneously to come up with what they serve to their subscribers. So that said, as soon as a permit becomes active in EFACs, it's going to be on their list. But we won't have, if we don't have the documentation either by an e-permit location plat that we can consume, and that's a pretty quick process. I wish all operators could do that, or a paper version that we could scan and index. Until we have that, we can't start the process, so to speak, for that particular permit number. As much as I would love to tell you to, contact DEP or us first in either situation, it may be a wash, because if you contact them first, a lot of times that, they may hear, I'm looking for a location plat, and then they automatically think, well, we've got it already. But it's in their workflow. It might be in Meadville, it might be in Williamsport, or it could be right there in Pittsburgh. And it's just on somebody's desk. It hasn't, made its way through whatever they got to check off to get in the inter-office mail to get to us for consumption. So you feel free to contact Oil and Gas Management with any burning, omissions of permit numbers. But if you don't get anywhere, certainly you can call me.
Yeah.
And if sometimes we can go and help the process along if it's just across the street. If it's one of the other offices, then it's a little harder to find.
I understand there's probably a lag there. And it can
There's a
be
little lag, yeah.
substantial. Well, it can be weeks long. But usually what I'm checking on are things that are like months. Like I've got records from my